Ukraine awaits the arrival of Keith Kellogg while the Russians prepare for military exercises in Belarus. Is there a danger for Europe? We are talking to Andreas Umland, an analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Mr. Umland, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me again.
So let's start with the first question. Trump announced that starting August 1, Washington will introduce a 30% tariff on goods from the EU. There is already a reaction from the Ursula von der Leyen and Emmanuel Macron that the EU will be forced to make measures in response. What do you think of Trump's customs policy regarding the EU in particular, and why did the intense negotiations between the EU and the USA for several weeks fail to produce results?
I think that is a really sad development because on the world stage, the European Union and the United States have similar interests. They're Western liberal democracies, and therefore, one would think that there shouldn't be such ridiculous problems between them. Several years ago, there was actually the project of a common market between the United States and the European Union, in which there would have been no tariffs at all. But unfortunately, this project did not materialize back then, and now we have the result of this, that we now have this trade war between the European Union and the United States, and one can only hope that at the end both parties will find a compromise and this unfortunate period will end.
So you think this is already a trade war, or maybe there will be some negotiations and that will stop, so Trump will stop his sanctions, not sanctions, but these tariffs?
Yes, I hope this is more actually like a negotiation now step for Trump. So he wants to increase the stakes and he wants to get at the end some more convenient, so to say, for the US trade deal out of this. I hope this is not something principal and long-lasting. But with Trump, one never knows. He's very unpredictable. So far, the experience has been that he has gone back on his measures. And I hope this will also be this time the case, and eventually the EU and the US will find a solution that will be sort of acceptable for both sides.
Sanctions, it's a very hot theme for us, and Fico is ready to support the 18th package of sanctions if an alternative to Russian energy resources is found for Slovakia. But Orban is still working out Russian narratives. In your opinion, can it be profitable for the EU to keep such characters as Orban and Fico and hide behind them in their unwillingness to abort such sanctions?
I think they're not hiding really behind Orban and Fico. Some countries maybe. I wouldn't exclude, for instance, that let's say a country like Austria or Spain, they may be not too unhappy about this, but officially they support the sanctions package. I would make a distinction between Slovakia and Hungary. Slovakia is now a problematic country for the EU, but it has become this way only more recently. And there may be some real national interest here involved in that Slovakia has kept this dependence from Russian oil and is now looking for help from the European Union in ending this dependence. So in principle, that may be then a constellation that will make the solution of this problem possible, and then the eventual adoption of this sanctions package possible. And it looks as if this sanctions package will finally introduce some relevant, some really biting sanctions for Russia, and one only hopes that it will get through as soon as possible, and then have an effect also on the Russian economy.
Okay, so Donald Trump can find more than $3 billion to help Ukraine, and he can also use the $5 billion in Russian assets that are currently in the USA. Could this push Europe to resolve the issue of frozen assets and transfer them to Ukraine?
If the US indeed would go this way and would unfreeze the currently frozen Russian assets in the US, I think that would be a strong signal towards the EU. And if indeed the US would take this step, one could only welcome it. And perhaps then the much larger amount that is currently frozen, mainly in Belgium, as far as I know, could perhaps be finally used to support Ukraine. And this much larger amount would really make a difference in the war. As far as I know, we're talking about $200 billion or euros. So that would actually be a quite significant amount with which Ukraine could buy most of the weapons that it wants. So hopefully we'll see some progress finally with this old question.
How do you think and how do you see that Trump has seriously turned towards Ukraine and is gradually moving away from Russia?
That is difficult to say because, as I already mentioned, Trump is unpredictable, and so far the move has only been rhetorically and has not really yet have any significant new material repercussions. Apparently, the earlier stop, the earlier break of the currently approved military help for Ukraine has been withdrawn. So this help seems to be now flowing again. But that is a program that was already taken and approved under the previous president, Joe Biden. So that is already approved money that the Congress has already given its okay to. So now the question is whether Trump will be ready to take some new steps that go beyond the already earlier approved programs. And if that really happens, that would, of course, be great. I hope for it. I don't think it has so much to do with Trump suddenly becoming more virtuous, but the Republicans may be realizing that so far American support for Ukraine remains popular with ordinary Americans, and Ukraine in general is popular with ordinary Americans in spite of the Russian propaganda. And so this is now also a domestic issue, an issue for the next elections for Congress, and perhaps this will drive eventually not only the Republican Party but also Trump and the people around him into a more supportive stance for Ukraine.
Russia says that there is a need for a second Istanbul. The day before, Sergei Kislitsa noted that the format of the negotiations between the two sides has exhausted itself. In your opinion, how feasible is the third Istanbul now, or what further negotiations can bring results?
The problem here is, of course, that Russia may not actually mean real negotiations, but a new negotiation theater. Basically, some talks that are meaningless, perhaps even signing some agreement that then will not be fulfilled, as was earlier the case, not only with Ukraine, actually. Russia has also not fulfilled its peace agreements with Moldova from 1994 or with Georgia from 2008. So the suspicion here must, of course, be that this is just a diversion that is just made for the international community, some sort of show of talks that gives some people the hope that this will bring anything. So currently, I don't think that this format or any other format would make sense. It would only make sense once Russia really feels the pressure from more military help for Ukraine and more sanctions against Russia. if then a different situation is on the ground and in the Russian economy, then such negotiations will again make sense.
Keith Kellogg is coming to Ukraine for a week. What should we expect from this visit?
That is only to be welcomed, and Ukraine has done well, I would say, in the last half year in keeping the contact and keeping the relations with the US intact in spite of the many problems that both countries have. That Kellogg is now coming for such a long time, that's a relatively long time. For 1 week to Ukraine is only to be welcomed. And hopefully this will bring something. Kellogg is also among the Trump and my advisors the most, I would say, enlightened persons concerning this war. He is a military man. His daughter is active for Ukraine. So I have actually hopes for this visit. The problem will rather be how influential Kellogg himself and his advice is in Washington, because there are competing voices in the White House, in the MAGA movement, that make his position unclear, or let's say his influence, the degree of his influence on decisions made by the president, unclear.
Russia is going to start military training on the territory of Belarus. How do you see these exercises as a threat to Europe? Is this a threat or isn't it? And Kellogg has also visited Belarus a few weeks ago. You know about that and how do you think what he was talking about with Lukashenko? Can they discuss these exercises?
Yeah, I would say that this is largely psychological warfare on the side of Russia. It wants to make nervous the European Union, NATO, Poland, the Baltic countries, and of course also Ukraine with these exercises. There could be also a new attack from the side of Belarus on Ukraine, as we had in 2022. So this is worrisome, but I would suspect that in Kyiv, the leadership, the Ukrainian leadership, is watching all of this very carefully, and therefore there will not be escalation. I think one should not pay too much attention to this Russian psychological warfare, because it is, as I said, it's designed to make people nervous. And rather assess what is the material situation. And I think the NATO and EU countries are safe, even if there are now these exercises. Ukraine has to worry, of course, what these exercises mean, but I think that is all very well understood in Kyiv.
So let's talk about the sanctions, because it's very important, sanctions from the United States. We have already talked about the EU sanctions, and now it is interesting for me, should we expect sanctions against Russia from Trump, and how quickly they can be, when can we expect the sanctions?
I'm afraid I can't say, because, as I mentioned already, Trump is unfortunately unpredictable. There are different people in the White House around Trump who are advising him, who have very different views on this war. And there is now this move in Congress, in the Senate, to introduce large-scale secondary sanctions on countries that are still trading with Russia. If this sanctions package goes through the Congress and will then be signed by Trump, and if it remains with the text that it originally had, then this would be a big move forward. But I'm still skeptical that we will have this result. It sounds very good, but whether it will then really go into force is, to me, unfortunately, an open question. And a lot will here also depend on the different forces within the White House, within Washington, within Congress, within civil society and media, how much also the public opinion of the US can then influence the White House.
Okay, let's talk about Trump's proposition. Trump proposed to transfer weapons to Ukraine through NATO and thought that the alliance would pay for American weapons that would be transferred to Ukraine. What do you think about the alliance's position regarding this prospect?
On first glance, that seems to be sensible because Ukraine is in Europe, and so it sounds like Europe should be paying for these weapons, and that should be the deal. What is forgotten here, of course, on Washington's side is that this entire war has become possible only because Ukraine was disarmed in the 1990s. It had nuclear warheads back then, many thousands of nuclear warheads, and in the 1990s, Washington and Moscow together pressed Kyiv to give away these warheads, all of these warheads. And we had then, as a result, this now infamous Budapest Memorandum about security assurances from the US and Great Britain for Ukraine. And in my interpretation, at least, the US is also asked to now sort of fulfill at least the spirit of this Budapest Memorandum and of the deal of the 1990s, because that was then in the national interest of the US to get Ukraine to give away these weapons, among them also intercontinental ballistic missiles that could have reached the United States. And now has come the time to fulfill that. It's not in the text of the Budapest Memorandum. The Budapest Memorandum is not a military alliance between Ukraine and the US. But if you look at the situation in which this memorandum was signed and the already mentioned spirit of it, I think the US should also continue helping Ukraine out of its own budget and not only with the help of European budgets. So I think what we now have, this suggestion from Trump that the Europeans buy American weapons for Ukraine makes sense from his sort of transactional approach to foreign affairs and his America First policy. But he's forgetful, and the White House and Washington in general is forgetting, of course, that this situation in which Ukraine has found itself today has a lot to do with the US following an America First policy already in the 1990s. US-American national interest goes first, and that's why Ukraine had to disarm itself back then, and now has for the US has come at the time to fulfill, so to say, the deal from 30 years ago.
What are your prospects for ending the war? Do you believe in the terms that announced by the head of Ukrainian intelligence? Budanov said that a ceasefire will take place within the next few months and that the war may end by the end of the year.
Well, Mr. Budanov would know better than me. He is certainly better informed than me. I'm getting my information only from mass media and from official documents. So I'm also having this hope. Perhaps now, if we see a change of the policy in Washington and sort of a realignment between European policies and American policies towards Russia and Ukraine, then I could imagine that happening. Then perhaps there will be pressure felt in Moscow to actually come forward with a more constructive approach, and perhaps then indeed negotiations could make some sense. But as I said, it's still so far only this change in Washington has happened in words. It has not yet happened in deeds, and but once these new policies will come into force and actually have an effect, then I could indeed imagine that perhaps by the end of the year the war will be over.
Mr. Andreas, we'll hope, we have a hope, and I am very appreciate you for this conversation. I'd like to remind our viewers that Andreas Umland, an analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies, was with me on the stream. And I'd like to ask our viewers to like this video if you like it, and leave your comments under this interview. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for having me.